it in the first 6 weeks. So open chain stuff has its value. Okay. So a knee extension, in terms of isolated quads activation, actually has the highest. Okay. A squat, look what it's got. But before you saw that, who would pick a squat as probably their first line exercise for a quad? Yep, that's fair. It's because you get told open chain's the devil. Don't do anything open chain. Okay. Now I'm not saying now just ignore a squat and go and do knee extensions, but what does a squat do? There has to be 100% of activity. So where's the rest of it going? Hips, everywhere else, isn't it? So it's a more of a whole body action. So it's important for whole body function and skill and all that sort of stuff. But if you're after just pure isolation around the quad, then you might pick something that's a bit more single joint action. You see what I'm getting at? So you need a mixture of the two. So if I do a squat and I have someone, all they're doing is they just turn it into a bit of a hip hinge sort of exercise, they then try and run and they can't because they've got no suspension system in their leg because their body's just been throwing it to their hips all the time. Okay? Leg press, so you've got knee extensions about 70 odd, leg press is about 50 odd, squatting is about 40 odd, roughly. Depends on how it's cued and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, again, we tend to think of closed chain as being the only way to load a quad, but it's not quite true. Okay, so just as a bit of a summary. So quad strength is important because stronger quads means that you can get horizontal ground reaction force, which is important for deceleration. So that change of direction stuff. If you don't have a strong quad, your body can't absorb that force. Quad's function is predictive of what we call sagittal running mechanics. So if I have good quads, from side on, I'm going to have a nice fixed leg as I run. If I've got no quads, then I'm going to run with a much stiffer leg because I'm not going to be happy to load into a bent position. Okay, and then my PhD, we looked at correlations with quad strength on ultimate return to sport level. Okay, and it's good, but it's not as good as, say, like peak speed and things like that. Okay, hamstrings. So usually, if you get a group of physios when you do a talk, and you get them to say, right, give me your 5 favourite quads exercises, they light up. They've got a million of them. When you say give me your 5 hamstring exercises, people run out generally after about 2. Okay, so as a standard, we're generally very poor at doing hamstring stuff. Okay, why do you reckon that is? So quads, we said, help you with what? And it's a suspension system. So early days when you've had a knee injury, getting good quad function helps you do stairs, helps you sit for long periods of time, helps you do all that sort of stuff. So your general daily life stuff is very heavily reliant on quads. What do you reckon your hamstrings help you with? Yeah, or more importantly? So yes, it does, but more importantly, speed. So running speed. Okay? Which is why you tear a hamstring at a high speed. Your hamstrings don't tend to do much until you're above 80%. So your hamstrings stop your leg. So when you run, your leg swings through, and then something's got to stop your leg from flying off into space. So it comes through, so it's got to decelerate your limb, and then you catch, and then you pull through again. So your job of your hamstrings is more or less to stop your leg from just flying off into space. Okay, so from a rehab point of view, we get a lot of reward for doing quads exercises. Early days, we get no reward for hamstrings because it's not until we start to push things up to a higher level. Okay, but you've got to program it in early. Otherwise, you leave yourself, a bit like we had with that rehab time frame. You don't leave any hamstring stuff till the end. You've got a lot of catching up to do right at the end. So give them hamstring stuff nice and early. Has anyone seen a Nordic before? Yep. So has anyone read the whole debate about there's sort of like the Catholics and the Protestants when it comes to hamstring rehab. There's the group that think that the hamstring sort of works isometrically, and so they're all about hip hinge type stuff. Like, have you ever seen like a back extension where people sort of hit there and then they try and tense their hamstring, they grab heaps of weight and then they lift up? Then you've got the other group, so that's more like this sort of an action. And then you've got this group which thinks that the hamstrings work eccentrically, stops your limb flying off into space. So what they're doing is they're trying to super maximally load it to try and get your leg so it's comfortable being out in this position. Because most of the time you tear your hammy just as your leg is about to touch the ground. So it's in its really sort of elongated position. Okay, so when you read hamstring stuff, these two sort of sit and throw rocks at each other. But like most things, I think both of them are appropriate. So when you look at sort of muscle volume changes with this, you've got your biceps, long head, short head, you've got your semitendinosus, you've got your semimembranosus. Okay, so the red is Nordics, the black is more this back extension. Okay, so again, there's a lot of crossover there, but what's one thing that sort of sticks out on that graph? So I'll make it easy for you. So if you've got lateral, you've got medial, what does Nordics tend to bias? Yeah, so it's got a bit of a medial hamstring bias, doesn't it? Okay, is where the back extension ones, not exclusively, probably tend to have a little bit of a bias towards lateral. Okay, so we tend to think of hamstring rehab as being hip dominant, knee dominant. The reality, it's probably medial and lateral. Okay, so I have both of them in there. And again, like we said, so if we go a hamstring curl, so for ages, hamstring curls were the devil. Again, because it's not functional. When you're training your hamstring, you're training in a shortened position, all of that sort of stuff. In terms of its like isolated activation, it's the more isolated the exercise, which is why Nordics are quite popular, because it's a way of super maximally loading the hamstring without risk. You know, if you go a heavy eccentric deadlift, what do you reckon is going to go before your hamstring? Probably your back. Yeah. So it's a way of throwing lots of load at your hamstring. As well, you look at things like squat, it hasn't got deadlift in there. What about bridging? Who would give bridging for hamstrings? Okay, have a look at that, 30 and 24%. So it's not that good. It's good in early days when you're trying to work on a bit of activation, but if, you know, again with physios you come across, you go, give me your favourite hamstrings, and they'll go this, and they'll go some kind of bridge. Okay, it's got to go heavier than that. Okay, now this is talking about open chain versus closed chain. So measured shear force on the knee. So have you guys seen the isokinetic dynamometer over in the lab over there? Yeah, I used it to death when I did my PhD. So that's as open chain as it gets, okay? Your native ACL has about 1200 newtons of sort of braking strain. So pick your exercise, squat, lunge, hamstring curl. The measured shear force on your ACL is zippo, nothing. Okay, even a knee extension, which is as open chain as it gets, has about 300. So it's got a little bit on there, but it's not. The one thing that does have a fair bit of shear force is impact. So when you see someone that's had a knee reconstruction, you're sort of forced into waiting, or a meniscal repair or something like that. You have to wait a certain period before you can let them run, because you're waiting for some healing. So generally, they won't let people run. There's no marker pens here, is there? No. So with a knee reconstruction, when they use a bit of your hamstring, it's a dead bit of tissue the second that it gets put in your knee. So it sort of dies, and your body forms new tissue over the top of it. So at about the 3-month mark is when it's starting to head back up again. So if you expose them to impact too early, you can stretch the graft out. Okay, so that's where you need a nice healthy interaction between tissue healing and function with stuff. And as you get through with your career, you'll get exposed to some of this stuff, and it'll make more sense. How's your brains going? You okay? Yep. Okay, and then like we were saying with that high, medium and low load, so if you look at how people, the different sort of qualities of exercise you can give people, how people improve with those tends to follow in that pattern. Okay, so these top two here, knee extension, a hamstring curl and a leg press, so you've got going to be, just trying to get which one it is. So you've got that one, your leg press is that one there, and then you're up there. So they're the first to kind of come good. So this is time, so you've got percentage, like how your good leg compares to your bad leg, and then you've got time, so up to 2 years after an operation. So the first ones to come good are generally your strength ones, then the next ones to come good are more your power-based ones. Okay, and then that kind of makes sense. So tendons, just to put this one in. So if someone has a tendon injury, it's like an Achilles tendon, patella tendon, any of those sorts of tendon-based ones. Have you guys done much in the way of that, like tendinopathy yet? The pathology? Yep, heaps of it. Yep, so you guys know the difference between a reactive and a degenerative tendon? No, okay. So with a tendon, you get, so we used to call everything tendinitis, right? That meant that it was, you get, your body's always turning over new tissue. It's a normal sort of phenomenon. With a tendinopathy, you get a shift, so the damage sort of exceeds the level of repair. And because with a hamstring, if you do your hamstring, you know about it straight away. These ones are big, tendons are big, strong things, so they take a bit more damage. So the damage is usually a lot smaller. And then you get damage, because it's never that bad in the beginning, people can sort of push through for a while. So they get damage, half a repair, damage, half a repair, and the cycle goes around and around and around. And we used to call it tendinitis because what that meant was that it's just an inflammatory process. Okay, so that's what you call the reactive component, and that's where you get all the pain. Swelling causes pain. Okay, then what we know is the longer that cycle goes around for, is you get what's called the degenerative part. So the body's trying to heal itself. So you get, the tendon starts to hypertrophy. You start to get little blood vessels growing, what they call neovessels, which have little nerve endings growing into it. If it goes on long enough, you can get little split tears and little bits of calcification and all these sorts of changes of healing. And that's what we call the degenerative part. So at any given, and the degenerative part equates to how much abuse the tendon can take. So a normal healthy tendon can take this much. The crappier the tendon, the lower its threshold, and every time it gets overstimulated for what it can take, you get inflammation, pain, all of that sort of stuff. Does that make sense? So in terms of managing a tendon, you've got an irritable tendon, which is the reactive component. You've got a degenerative, and you've also got a degenerative component. So in terms of fixing it, you want to sit just underneath that threshold and then slowly build it back up again. All right, and I do the same thing for like degenerative knees and things that have a pretty low sort of a threshold. So how would I know how much is too much, do you reckon? What's a good broad...
Pain.
Yeah? When?
During and post.
Yeah, how long post?
Probably the 24 hours post.
Yeah.
Even that long.
Yeah, so for me, for any of these sort of overuse type injuries, degenerative stuff, I'm okay with them having sort of 3 to 4 out of 10 soreness after a session, as long as they have no increased soreness the next day. So they might say sometimes that they're a bit sore getting out of bed, especially if you've got a crappy degenerative knee. If they have sort of soreness after they've had some exposure, but then they wake up the next day how they always are, then you're not pushing them too bad. If you give them some exposure, and then the next day they can't walk, you've overcooked them. Okay? So if you have a degenerative, overuse sort of injury, so can they still run? So with that